Well, beginning in 1993, I was employed as a second grade teacher in the Kansas City School District at Satchel Paige Elementary School. And I started in the middle of the year. They had 5 substitute teachers, and I went and interviewed in December and became the new second grade teacher. I remember the first day I opened the door and I walked in, and all of my students were literally on top of their desks. And so I knew it was the right place I needed to be. During that specific period of time, there was a large focus on the magnet-themed school. So Satchel Paige Classical Greek Academy was focused on the classical Greek educational format philosophy, and was established with a large emphasis on physical ed and academics, and in trying to draw students from all over the city to enroll at Satchel Paige. Well, in my opinion, I believe when the schools were first established, a lot of funding was put into them, and the buildings looked beautiful, and were really, set up with the state-of-the-art facilities and materials. And gradually, I observed when I started in 1993 that funding stream had been pulled back a little bit, and that we started to see resources be taken away. The diversity of the schools, the school that I was in, seemed to be lacking. There wasn't as much of a mix of children of color and white students. And so you really started to see, as the funding stream pulled away, that the diversity of the student population changed as well. I really don't have any recollection specifically of conversations about that, but I did observe there was a racial divide between the staff, and I felt like our staff was pretty, 50% African American, 50% white teachers, but you did start to see this, I don't know what you'd call it, a breakup of the staff. And so one of the experiences I remember, I was a brand new second grade teacher coming down the hallways, and there would be an African American teacher coming with her class walking, and she would literally block me from being able to walk my class down the. So it was a little bit of a heated environment, I think, at that point. I don't know if it was. I don't know what it was, but I do remember that. The kids didn't seem to have an opinion on that. Kids were kids, and everyone played together, and it didn't matter to the kids. The kids really didn't have any preconceived ideas about race or anything like that. And, I taught second grade and fourth and fifth grade, and I never observed that with my students. Well, for me, it was my first full-time teaching job, and I learned as much about integration of schools as the kids were and as the other staff members. My background was on the Kansas side, totally white, suburban school district. I always had been raised in Johnson County and went to junior college in Kansas. And so for me, it was a learning experience as much as it was for staff and students. So I actually learned as much about integration and about diversity. You talk about on-the-job training. That's created the foundation for who I am as a teacher and as an administrator. For me, it was really when I started doing home visits and developing relationships with the families, because like I had mentioned earlier, the class had 5 or 6 substitute teachers. There was just a high turnover in teacher and staff at the school. So they really didn't have that, had built relationships with adults in the building. So I really reached out to families and tried to establish that, because the classroom was in total chaos. So there wasn't going to be any learning or teaching going on until I was able to develop those relationships with students. So I took it, my first priority was to do that and learn about each student, where they were from, what their parents were like, and for the parents to develop that trust for me, because honestly, I think 99% of my students were African American, and here I am, this new white teacher coming in to teach, and they didn't know who I was, and so it was really about breaking down those barriers. And once I was able to do that, I could literally pick up the phone and call Mrs. Jones, and we had that rapport that, you know, and the behaviors improved, and in the discipline, and we were able to get some teaching and learning done. So it was really, for me, about building those relationships. You know, I really started as a classroom teacher, and my role progressed into wanting to take on more of a leadership role, and I felt empowered that I could make change and work not only as a classroom teacher, but then as a building principal. And so it really helped me see that there were other opportunities out there, and not that I didn't love teaching, but I could make a greater impact by moving into leadership. And so that's what I did later on in my career. Of course, it was always about, you know, the test scores and raising student performance, but I don't really recall any, you know, specific groundbreaking student outcomes. For me as a classroom teacher, it was really about moving my 25 students, you know, to grade level. And so many of my students were probably 2 to 4 years behind in reading and math, and so it was really just getting them to grade level and being ready to move on to the next grade. So I really took it as my classroom, and really wasn't looking out at the whole district at that point. Well, a couple. I really saw that they were able to, you know, learn about other students from different cultures. I even had children that were from, you know, they were Muslim students and Latino students, and so it really allowed them to learn about each other's cultures and their parents, but they also saw how they were similar, but how they were different in a way that allowed them to just be kids. And so I didn't really see the divides as much as I saw the integration among the students. I think they started off with a great idea and a great, you know, dream about having it, you know, all the schools be integrated. But I think as the resources were taken out, you know, they lost funding or went through all the money and built all these beautiful buildings, that really, when it came down to it, the schools actually went back to being segregated, in my opinion. So if you drive through Kansas City, you know, you've got the Latino communities, the African American communities, and I really think it sprang the involvement of charter schools starting. And so you start to see charter schools start to open, and where parents are starting almost to segregate their kids into schools. And so I don't know originally if that was the focus, but they started to lose a lot of students. So I don't know. That's just my opinion on that. Focusing the resources where they're needed, making sure that teachers and kids are getting what they need to be successful in classrooms. A lot of times those resources are at the top, you know, with department chairs and division chairs, and they never make it to where they need to be in the classrooms. And I think that so many times it's first and foremost about building the relationships with students, and so getting to know students and knowing what their background is, and developing that first. And no matter if you're black, white, Latina, that has to be first in everyone's their goal in educating students. Just that I hope that we focus on our public schools, and that no matter what that looks like, no matter what zip code you live in, that all kids deserve a quality education and a quality school, and that it is possible to do that. I don't think it takes $55 million, in state funding a year that we don't have anything to show for it. So I think we have to go back and look at where are those resources going, how are they impacting kids, and then anything else that's being wasteful spending needs to be looked at very carefully. So that's what I would say.